It was my dad, who's no longer with us. He passed away in 2013. He was an amazing man. I can remember him saying, don't be too cool to appreciate a sunset. Don't be too cool to appreciate beauty. If you get to where you have a hard time admitting to your friends that something is beautiful, and not like, oh, that woman, not like that, but like that tree is gorgeous. Do you hear that bird? My gosh. If you ever have a hard time admitting that to your friends, you need to get some new friends.
Hello, and welcome to the Randall Osché Podcast, where we create a safe space for meaningful and thought-provoking conversations. We have long-form interviews with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, artists, and changemakers in order to deconstruct their journeys and to pass out valuable life lessons and life-changing perspectives for listeners like yourself, so that you can, as Randall says, learn their lessons without their scars. So whether you're tuning in on your daily commute or during a workout or cooking dinner, we are happy to have you join us. So take a seat, relax, grab a cup of tea, and join the conversation. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
Jake Phillips, welcome to the show. For those of the listeners who don't know you yet, why don't you take a quick moment and introduce yourself?
Okay. Well, good to be on the show. Thanks for having me. My name's Jake. I'm a voice actor, and we actually met doing voice acting, discussion some time ago. So I'm a voice actor, and I have a podcast and YouTube channel called the Cultured Bumpkin, where I do audiobook style readings of the classics, oftentimes in a very camped up Southern accent, which makes it fun. It lets you hear it in a new way for the first time, kind of a thing.
I like that. I like that terminology, camped up Southern accent, right?
I say that because a lot of people will be like, I just love your voice. It's just so nice and it's just like mine. And I'm like, lady, I do not talk like this.
Nice. So I had reached out to Jake on Fiverr. So shout out to Fiverr, one of my favorite platforms as a buyer and seller, I suppose. But I've been using Fiverr for a while, so it's been a great resource for me. And leveraging Fiverr, I had met Jake because I was recommended by a coach that I was working with that I should explore voiceover, like doing the voiceover work. And Jake had a gig on Fiverr where he was offering some coaching for people considering voiceovers. I didn't pursue that, but I decided, I guess, years later to use my voice for this podcast. So here we are.
Yeah.
Jake, I got two questions. I'm very good at multiple questions at the same time.
Okay.
I try to keep it easy, though. I know a bit of your story. You weren't always a voice actor.
Great.
What were you doing before? And then how did you get started to voice acting? And then part two of that, which I'll remind you of, is how you've grown to the podcast and the TikTok channel, I believe, right? Because it didn't start that way. So let's just back up the train a minute. What were you doing before you decided to be a voice actor? And then how did you become a voice actor?
Well, I guess my real job previous to this, I was a supervisor in a raw materials warehouse and a tire factory. That is not where I first had the idea to be a voice actor, but that's the last job that I had before I started doing this full time 6 years ago now. I think it started when I was in the Army in the mid first decade of the 2000s. And I was a platoon leader in a cavalry troop. And I had a platoon sergeant come up to me and say, basically, your Southern accent is so thick and horrendous, nobody can understand you. And, once we get over to where we're going, if you're doing that on the radio, we're going to get hurt. You can't be talking like that. And so I'd had people tell me that before as an insult, like, man, you country hick and stuff. And it was true. So it didn't really bother me, but also, screw you, dude. I don't care what you think. I'm not going to, do anything about this. But when I had a guy that I knew cared about me say, I cannot understand you. And when we're trying to talk over the radio, it would be terrible if somebody got hurt because we're saying, what'd you say, Lieutenant? And that motivated me to start learning English, good mid-regional diction where the guy from New Hampshire could understand just as well as the guy from California and everybody in between. And so even though I was not thinking of voice acting yet, that became the starting point. I consider that the starting point.
I talk about this all the time, but Steve Jobs, he did a commencement speech at the University of Stanford. And in the speech, he talks about looking in the moment. You don't know how the future is going to unfold, but you have to have some sort of faith in something. He's not talking about religion necessarily, but the universe, whatever, yourself, faith in something, that the dots are going to connect themselves moving forward. But looking back, those things all make sense, right? And I just find it fascinating that at this moment in time, you can look back and think about this moment that happened where this guy that cared about you and cared about the others around you had prompted you to work on improving how you articulated your words, and that had propelled you to where you're at today.
Exactly. I'm the same way. It's fascinating. Yeah, it remains the best acting training and advice I've ever gotten. And I've had a lot, you know what I mean? It's like, that's still the best thing I've ever gotten.
That's crazy. I've heard that from other people that have had like a strong New York accent, that they were given advice to tone it down in professional settings. People might have understood them, and the risks were lower, right? Lives were in jeopardy, or going to potentially get hurt or anything like that. But just for their branding purposes of like, fix this and you're going to be accepted by more people. But what did you do? So you got that advice. How did you go about toning it down or figuring out a way to articulate your word? You said mid-regional. How did you define it? Mid-regional?
Yeah, mid-regional diction or mid-regional accent is...
mid-regional diction.
Yeah. Being that I was at Fort Riley, Kansas, which is interesting because that's kind of the epicenter of the American accent. So the further you get from the heartland like that, the more you will hear some kind of an accent. I think like Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska area, that is probably the best English there is. And I mean that as far as for, let's say, advertising. So if you're a big advertiser, you want to appeal to everybody everywhere. And a mid-regional voiceover does that. For a guy in Maine, for a lady in San Diego, they're going to not worry about the voiceover and they're going to focus on the product. Whereas if the same exact product had a thick Southern accent or a Boston accent or something, you might feel, well, I'm not from the South, so that must not be for me. And indeed, it's a little bit disconcerting to some people. The comedian Jeff Foxworthy back in the day had a bit about that where he said, you would hate for the brain surgeon to come in and point at the scan and say, all right, now what we're going to do is saw the top of your head off. That would be like, whoa, I don't know if this guy knows what he's doing. That's how it is with accents, not just Southern, but all kinds. And all that to say, the locals in Kansas, you just get out and hang out with them, listen to them. They will rub off on you with good, proper English. And that's kind of what I did. So it was good that I was where I was, I guess, because, I was able to lose the accent quickly without trying that hard. Just like, okay, talk to everybody else where they can understand you, and you'll be okay. And, obviously it's not that I'm ashamed of where I'm from or anything like that, but it's just, I see the need. I need to be able to speak where anybody can understand me in a sort of a high pressure situation.
It's an evolution, right? I think that, what got us to where we're at now isn't going to be the things that get us to where we want to go. And I think people should go through like a healthy evolution for the right reasons, of course. So you got the advice and you happen to be sort of the right place, right time for that to happen organically. I know it was deliberate in the sense of you were cognizant of how to speak and paying attention to others speak and then modeling their diction, right? How hard was that when you wanted to say something? Were you mentally like, okay, can't say it like my former self. I have to say it like the person I want to be tomorrow.
I don't really remember overthinking it too much. The main thing for me was don't let your words touch. So in Southern, it's like, hey, how y'all doing? What are you doing? You going to come over here? And all the words are touching each other. So what I would do is say, let's chop them up where the words are separated by a bit of silence or a harsh sibilant or something like that. And then it just immediately becomes easier to understand, even if the accent doesn't even change that much.
I know now that Southern accent is a tool in your toolbox that you use for voice acting purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever feel yourself just being pulled back into speaking like that? Or is that not like, is this how you always talk? Or sometimes if you're tired or, whatever, that you just kind of let it go?
I would say probably when I'm tired or something, but I know that if I'm in, let's say, local hardware store and there's 3 70-year-old dudes talking about, nuts and bolts, and I'm in there for something, I'm probably gonna, hey, I'm looking for one of those little things, I'm not gonna try to be all proper. I'm gonna just talk like the locals do.
Yeah.
But that's almost a little intentional, I suppose. And I don't think that's dishonest, like I'm pretending to be somebody I'm not. I would say that's probably how I talk. And then all the other times I'm just unconsciously being more, have my enunciating a little better.
You have to know your audience, right? And I think your tools and your toolbox are different than like my tools. And I might use different words where, like, depending on my audience or terminology or examples, if I'm trying to make a point based on who my audience is. But your tools and your toolbox are different. And it's your diction, it's your inflection, it's your accent or not accent. So yeah, I don't think it's misleading or misguided or anything like that. You just happen to have a different skill set than us. So that's where it started. And then how did you go from having that experience and then being like, I'm going to get paid for the skill that I have now?
Yeah, so that was around the same time I went to a theater production. The same first sergeant that told me that was actually he liked the performing arts, right? And one time he said, hey, my wife's out of town. We got season tickets to the theater. You want to be my date? And then I was like, yeah, let's go. Because he was not the go out to the clubs on the evenings, and I wasn't either. So we said, sure. So we went to see, I forget what we saw. We saw a stage play. And I remember that being one of the first times that I thought, I would like to try that someday. I would like to pretend to be somebody I'm not in order to perform a role. That would be interesting. And I had never thought that before. And around the same time, I listened to an audiobook from the Chronicles of Narnia series by an actor who narrated it. It was named Kenneth Branagh, who's an incredible Shakespearean actor. And I remember having the same thought. Wow, with his voice, no music, no sound effects, no other actors, he sent me to a place far, far away, took me through all these emotions, made me happy, made me sad, conjured up all these images in my mind just on how he changed his voice. That's amazing. I think I want to try that. So that was probably 2008 or 9, but I didn't do anything about it for some years after. So I think probably 2014, maybe I finally bought a mic and started, I think I'm going to mess around with this a little bit. I still wasn't thinking make a living at it, but I think once I was in the tire factory about 2017, I decided, you know what? I want to make a living at this. And then I would do that in my free time. I would study, I would practice, figure out the business of it, how to get clients, all that stuff. And once I decided to do it, it was within, I think, a year and a half, I was doing it full time.
From 2014, when you had, I would consider, you changing your accent like a data point, like a dot, right, if you will, and then going to the stage play as another dot and listening to the audio book and having that thought as a dot. And this is all starting to make sense, right? And then you buy your mic in 2014, but then you don't make it a decision to actually do the thing, right? Like go sort of all in on it. Between 2014 and 2017, what do you think some of the challenges were that were holding you back from making the decision of, I could do this full time, or I should focus more on this thing that I want to pursue?
Well, part of it would be not knowing anything about the industry and thinking of it in terms of 20 or 30 years ago, like where you have to be in a big city, you have to drive to a studio, you have to have an agent, that kind of thing, which are all great things, but that's not the only way to do it anymore in this age of, you can make studio at your house, you can have top quality sound in your own home with great equipment now that you didn't have access to 20 or 30 years ago. So that was one of them, just not knowing enough about the industry. Well, then I would also say just, having a full-time job, you're beat at the end of the day, and you don't really put time and effort into it. So that would be part of it as well. I don't know. I would say once I just got to the point that I had an intense dislike for my factory job, that was sort of the kick in the pants I needed just to like, all right, we're getting out of here one way or
Yeah.
another. But I will do something I regret if I hang out here too much longer.
Yeah. So trigger point was you kind of dabbled in it, right? 2014, 2017. There's a trigger point of like, I can't continue doing what I'm doing now at the factory because I'm unhappy, I'm frustrated, this isn't working out to my benefit. And I have the skill set that has served me well to an extent, but how do I leverage this, pursue a better work-life balance situation for myself, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, excellent. So you were from 2014 to 2017, you were at the factory, but you were doing, I'm assuming you bought the microphone in 2014. From 2014 to 2017, you were still full-time at the factory. Did you have any paid gigs in that time period?
I think I had one.
And how did you get the first one?
A friend that, kind of an acting friend, because I've done some screen acting stuff too. And he was basically like, "Oh, you have a microphone, don't you? You want to do this voiceover for this trailer we're doing? I'll give you $100." I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I did that. He liked it. I had fun doing it. I thought, man, that was probably the easiest $100 I've ever gotten. I'll try that again. But I didn't really know how to pursue it because it was a
Right.
friend that just like walked up to me. And if you're, anyone in voiceover knows, that's great when that happens. But, unless you're just top tier, you're Anthony Hopkins or Benedict Cumberbatch, that's generally not how it works. You kind of have to go and find your own, beat the bushes for your own work.
Yeah. And then, so fast forward 2017, you decide to, a couple of things, like you don't know enough about the industry or how it works. So I imagine that's when you started dedicating more time, energy, and effort into figuring those aspects out. And I'm assuming that's also where you started to get some more clients. So talk to me a little bit about 2017 comes around, can't continue working in the factory. Did you continue working in the factory while you invested time
Yes.
on the other side?
Yes. So I was still there, but on lunch breaks and drive to and from work, I'm listening to podcasts or YouTube videos about the business of it and that kind of thing. And also practicing narration, practicing voices. It was a raw materials warehouse, and part of the warehouse was a rail yard out back with all these rail cars full of like carbon black powder. Like walk the rail yard and visually confirm that all of the rail cars are there. Rail didn't pick any up in the middle of the night, that they didn't pick up a full one when they're supposed to pick up an empty, that, just confirming that. That involved a lot of walking and a clipboard. So what I would do is I would have my duties on one side, and half the time, it doesn't take that long to visually do it, but there's 30 minutes of walking involved in order to do 5 minutes of work. So I would write on the right side of my clipboard like a monologue from Shakespeare or a poem or something, and just memorize it, read it. So I was always practicing accents and, okay, I'm going to say this, but I'm going to make it sound like I'm angry, or make it sound like I'm frustrated, or make it funny, and, it's whatever. So I was always practicing at work. And then when I got home, I would actually get into the booth, the little sound booth, which was a padded little closet that I grabbed from my wife, who was gracious enough to let me use that one for just sound. And I'd work on audiobooks and stuff, which is a great starting point. So yeah, once I decided to do it, I was pretty much thinking about it 24/7 when I'm not at work.
Yeah, I guess part of this, my project here with the podcast, is to like extract lessons and things that help you along the way become successful. And one of the things that I had a job where I was commuting an hour, 2 hours round trip. And I tried to make the most of that 2 hours, and I would listen to audiobooks about how to do my job better. I would listen to podcasts about how to do my job better. I would listen to podcasts about things that interested me, which were like mostly business or startups. One of the couple favorite podcasts I would listen to is like Business Wars. The Pitch, I think, was another one. But, formerly would listen to the news or something, but it's just for good information that doesn't really impact my life. So I made the conscious decision to stop listening to the news and to listen to audiobooks. While I didn't love commuting 2 hours a day, I do look back fondly on that time because it did give me a minimum of 2 hours a day to better myself. I try to make the most of the time. And I'm hearing the same thing from you. You could choose to listen to music. You could choose to listen to the news, but you had an objective, and that objective was become a voice actor. I've heard this be called like different things, like habit stacking. You're doing one thing, but while you're doing the one thing, what else can you do simultaneously to get, better bang for your buck and a better return on your time? So I think for the listeners out there, I think it's easy for us to come on the podcast and be like, hey, anybody can do this, but here's us deconstructing how you can apply it to yourself, right? So, if you have a job like Jake and you have to walk 30 minutes, but other than that, you're not really doing much. You could choose to listen to some music, or you could choose to listen to audiobook about pursuing your passion, or a podcast about pursuing your passion. When I started the podcast, I listened to podcasts about how to start podcasts, right? I think that once you flip the switch, you can find the time to do the things that are going to help you go further faster. So yeah, some of that resonates with me in my journey as well through my professional career, and just wanted to point that out. So you practiced the craft and you found time to practice and inform yourself on how it works in the industry. And how did you go from there to getting, say your next client or getting some repeat business?
Let's see, this would have been 2018, I think. There's a guy on YouTube who's a working voice actor and coach named Bill DeWeese. I was listening to a lot of his stuff, and I said, I just like how he talks. He has very much a anyone can do it mentality. And I think that I like that mentality. So much so that if you say you can't do it, I'm just going to say, well, you're full of beans. I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm not going to listen to anything you say. And so might as well go ahead and tell me I can do what I want to do, because that's what I'm going to do. And in his case, he was not a gatekeeper, like, oh, you shouldn't even try, because a lot of people in voice acting and in any industry, I suppose, are like that. You're like, oh, no, you just, it makes them feel better about themselves, I guess, to sort of rain on people's parades. But he is not that way. I was listening to him and I sort of did everything he said to do. And one of the things he said to do was get on Fiverr and get on ACX, which is the audiobook exchange that, Audible, or Amazon bought Audible. So it's a way of getting your foot in the door with audiobook narrations, if you like that kind of thing. So I was doing that. And between the two of those, I started getting a lot of work. And then as that starts, and I'll post on social media. I did this thing for this company, and then I started having other people email me or DM me and say, hey, what would you quote me to do this? And now I probably make more from off of, like when it first started, I was making a living off of, let's say, Fiverr, but now I make more from off of Fiverr just by word of mouth and repeat clients. But that's where it started, Fiverr and ACX.
Yeah, I started coaching. Like my executive coach helped me like really propel my career. And then from what I've done with my professional career and what I learned from my executive coach, I'm like, I now have a skill set where I can help others propel themselves through their career. I have information that is valuable to others that don't know that information. So I started a profile on Fiverr in December 2021 to coach people. And then I would call that performance coaching, because part of that is career. Where are you at now? Where you want to be tomorrow? If that's a promotion, raise, managing up better, etc. Or, I've helped people start their own businesses, things like that. But Fiverr I think it's a great entry point. It has zero downside. You just put your information there and people come to Fiverr to find people to do work for them. And even if you have to start at like the minimum $5 to get somebody to actually pay you to do the thing that you've never done before, it's a worthwhile investment of your time, because where else are you going to go that people are going to come and find you? Right. So I think it's a great starting point for anybody who's trying to start a freelance anything. Fiverr is good for that. I mean, I haven't quite cracked the code on having it be a full-time living, but how did you leverage Fiverr to be successful? I'm associating in this context success with income. So how did you leverage, I don't want to say hack, but like how did you hack Fiverr to go from having a few gigs to having a lot of gigs to having a full-time income?
Yeah, I would say from looking at, like, go on as a buyer, right? So you have the buying and selling sort of interfaces. So I would click buying. Well, then I would go in there and type in the thing that I offer, which is American male or male voiceover. I do accents, but, American male voiceover, Southern voiceover, male voiceover, English voiceover, and just see what pops up. And when the same faces pop up several times under several different names, I say, okay, well, this guy or gal is doing something right. What is it? Now, then I look on, what kind of keywords are they using? What kind of title do they have? I would say early on it was, what does their voiceover reel sound like? But now I think that's like fifth on the list. I think if you have a good presentation in the algorithm world we're in is more important, will put you before more people than your demo will, because they're not even going to get to the demo if they can't see you. So yes, what are the colors on their thumbnail? Is it black and white? Is it dramatic? Is it sort of gaudy? Is it eye-catching? What is it? And then, like I say, title, competitive pricing, where that kind of thing. Looking at what other people are doing that are clearly popping up in the search results, and then you sort of try to do something similar.
I think another thing I want to point out is that I find you can go further faster as a professional or even say as a hobbyist, but whatever you're trying to figure out, if you model the behavior of those who have come before you. Now, you don't need to copy their approach or how they do things exactly, but it's a good starting point, right? You can learn from the lessons of the people that came before you, and you can go further faster by doing that. So I think you've mentioned it a few times, Jake, where you listened to the guy's YouTube channel and he wasn't a gatekeeper, and his philosophy was that everybody can win, right? And that's my philosophy too. Like, there's enough resources in this world where we can all be successful and we can win. So there's no reason to gatekeep information. Right. And then, looking at the Fiverr profiles to see who's doing it well. I've done the same thing, probably not as well as you, but I look at, you can see like how many gigs they've completed and how many orders they have. So you can see who is getting the most business. And then you can, that to me would be another indicator of how well their profile is set up and if they're using key terms or whatever. But yeah, modeling behaviors of others and profiles of others that have come before you and that appear to be doing it successful. And then once you do that, you can certainly put your own twist on it and make it genuine and authentic to you. But you don't need to reinvent the wheel, folks.
Let's take a quick break from today's episode. If you are enjoying the conversation, please take a moment to look us up. You can find Randall on Instagram at Randall Osché, that's spelled at RANDALLOSCHE. And you can catch the show notes and other resources at randallosche.com. And now back to the episode.
What was the gig that you completed that you were like, this is pretty cool? Like, I made a good decision. I want to tell everybody in my network that I've made this pivot in my career and I got this gig and it's pretty effing cool.
Sunday Night Football intro, September 2019.
Okay.
So when that came in, and it was a guy on Fiverr said, hey, I need, can you send me a quote for this? It's full broadcast rights and all. Because, in the voiceover world, it's kind of like you do the word count or whatever, and then you do usage rights. So if we have a little 30-second commercial that you're only going to play on your YouTube channel, that will cost you less than if it's like, okay, I'm going to post this all over the country. So anyway, he said just full commercial rights or broadcast rights. So I sent him the offer. He said, great, I need this back. This was a Saturday afternoon, by the way. I was coming back from 38 with the family. We were down in Rosemary Beach, got some coffee. I looked at my phone, I got a little order. He said, is there any way to have this back within, I think he said 4 to 6 hours. And I was 4 hours from home. And I was like, yeah, all right, let's go, kids. And so he sent me the script and I looked at it and it was for a Saints and Cowboys game. And the way it was he didn't make a big deal about it. So I thought it must be in a regional promo because it was the Cowboys were playing in New Orleans. It must be, local TV or something. Well, then the next night I delivered it, gave him like 4 takes. He's like, great, love it, thanks, paid me, all that stuff. Next night, my mom's with my brothers and we're, got the game on. And then my voiceover comes on and I was like, get out. That's me, boys. And they're like, hey, that is you, yeah. Anyway, that was exciting. And it's also, that's sort of iconic. And when I post that on Facebook, like, hey, I did Sunday Night Football tonight, that got a lot of engagement and a lot of people would reach out like, hey, I'm trying to do this voiceover for my thing. Could I get you to do that? So that helped my business. But that was also kind of like, no matter what anybody says to me, I didn't like your voiceover, whatever. It's like, hey, I did the intro to Sunday Night Football. So, when you do a few of those, why don't you get back to me and I might listen to you. But I'm not going to listen to your criticism from where you're sitting.
Yeah, relax. It's like Randall only has 137 downloads of his podcast. How many do you have? 0, homie.
Exactly. And the people that are most critical are the least productive. And it's maybe hard to deal with, but eventually it's like, I do not care what you think. Rolled it off the internet. You don't know nothing. You got no posts. You're not producing anything. Why the F would I listen to you?
Yeah, I think that holds a lot of people back. I think probably even it held me back earlier on, but now I've adopted a few principles. I'm action oriented, right? I'm not going to overthink things. I'd rather do it. I'm not going to allow, good to become the enemy of great, however that saying goes, right? I'm going to not be a perfectionist. I'm going to put the work out there and I'm going to refine it over time. And other people, they want it to be perfect. They want to have the audience before they start doing the thing, but it doesn't work that way. My first episode was, it wasn't trash, but like the audio, we had some audio issues because we had a creaky chair, but so be it. It's published. And now like you can look at episode 5 and be like, oh, well, no creaky chair, right? So yeah, getting better. And the only way you're going to get better is by doing the thing. The only way you're going to get customers and gigs and the opportunities to be on Sunday Night Football, which is very cool, is by putting yourself out there. Not that this is a promo for Fiverr, but maybe it will turn out to be. I have noticed that a lot of people, when I give the recommendation for people like, oh, I want to be a graphic designer. I was like, okay, I had this conversation with a mentee a few weeks ago and I was like, are you on Fiverr? And he's like, no. I was like, why not? He's like, well, it's stigma this, stigma that. It's low pay. I was like, yeah, but you're not doing anything else. It's free to be on Fiverr. Be on Fiverr. It's not going to hurt anything. But I do think that there's a stigma with like it's low paying or there's not the best people on Fiverr. But I think it's like with anything else, and I would love to get your opinion of this. There's a wide range of skill sets on there, and there's also a wide range of price points for those skill sets. So while there are people that aren't as good as others as doing the thing, whether it's voice acting or coaching, there are exceptional professionals on Fiverr that are really good at doing the thing and charge handsomely for it. I think from your story, the thing I would want to point out is that there's also exceptional professionals looking at Fiverr for talent, right? Like
the guy from NBC.
right. Like the guy from NBC is looking through profiles on Fiverr for people that they need to help with their production for national television. I don't know if there's a better endorsement of a Fiverr situation than that. So you had that, you've been able to be successful with getting clients, and then you've grown. And then if I'm skipping any steps here, feel free to enlighten me. But it's been, I think that we first talked probably in 2021. So it's been a few years. And in that time, I've seen you, I think you probably started your podcast. I see you on TikTok. You have like 74,000 followers. You do the live readings. You do the different accents. I saw you post a clip of you doing, I don't know if it was stage acting, but you're performing on stage. So like that was like another thing. So what has transpired maybe is a better way to put the question of like, we're sort of talking from 2017 to where you're at now. How has your voice acting career transpired from that gig on Sunday Night Football to where you're at now? And then what are you doing now with the podcast and the channels?
Yeah, so I'm of the mind that if you really love something, you ought to do it for free some of the time. Like it keeps it pure to me. Some kid, like my nephew he does stop motion animation with Legos. So he'll do like World War II battles and they're just blasting each other with Legos. It's great. I love it. I love history. I love what he's doing, but he doesn't ever want to ask for anything. So, every once in a while I'll be like, hey, can I do a voiceover for your thing? Because I would love to do some of the voices for it. And he's like, oh, I would love it if you did that. So I'll do some like a voiceover for his stop motion animation channel. And then, anyway, I like that kind of thing. To me, and I'm not saying everyone is this or should be this way, but I need to do what I love some of the time for free to keep me coming back. With my podcast, I love classic literature. I do. And so for me, that's a way to say, or it started anyway, of I'm going to read this Mark Twain story. That's a way for me to practice. Nobody can tell me I didn't do it right because I directed myself. I did it exactly how I want to do it. If they don't like it, I don't really care if they like it or not. It's almost like a testing ground for me to try out new accents or, I'm going to put some background music in this one or maybe put some sound effects. I'm actually working on one right now is right when we got on kind of more of an audio drama style. So I got some other actors to help. I recently got my podcast monetized and then on YouTube the same. So I put a lot of my stuff on YouTube and that's been growing well. But in the description, basically I say, hey, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm a voice actor. If you want to work with me, here's how you get in touch. And so it's almost like my own marketing that each piece of content that I put up is a chance for someone to say, I love this guy. Where could I get more of his stuff? Oh, he's got books on Audible. There's a link. Oh, he's on TikTok. I'll follow him there. Oh, he's a voice actor. My uncle has a business. I'm going to send him his link, that kind of thing. My podcast and YouTube are a way of making money through ads and stuff, but also to say, here's my own, kind of do my own marketing.
I sort of hope this podcast accomplishes the pureness of it to me, like you had mentioned, is yes, I want to monetize it. Yes, I want it to be successful with monetization and having a large viewership. And I hope to get there someday. But if our episode, somebody listens to it and that propels them to reach out to you to get advice on how to be a voice actor, or they then open their own gig on Fiverr for whatever, that's success to me. I don't need to make money to do it in its purest form. We have information and I want to share that information with people. And we talked a little bit about at the beginning before we hit the record about unintended consequences of the podcast I've noticed so far. And it's given, people that I've had conversations with a platform to share their stories. And I've been surprised on how good that has made them feel about themselves, as well as they should, right? It gives them an opportunity to reflect of, I was here making minimum wage years ago, and now I'm here not making minimum wage, and this is the journey I've had, and dang, look at me, right? Without monetization, that's more than worth the time, energy, and effort I've put into the project. Speaking of monetization, though, we all gotta pay the mortgage and put food on the table. Tell me about, you said you just monetized your podcast. What does that mean? I know what monetization means. I use Buzzsprout as my host, but tell me about your scenario.
So I use Blueberry just because I had a friend who does podcast production and he recommended it as far as I was on SoundCloud for a long time and I migrated last year, I think. They have really good analytics, but basically one mode of it is to say, the ads that run before. So that's a small part of it. Well, then I have an online sort of a merch store for my podcast, The Cultured Bumpkin. And so I have in each episode, I'll sort of have it posted where one you could get hoodies and t-shirts, things like that. But also I do stuff for people that, maybe you don't care about the podcast, you don't listen, but you like classic literature. So I like to draw. So I drew a picture of Edgar Allan Poe, one of my favorite authors, an iconic picture. If you know literature, you recognize it. And then the caption says, I'm Poe, but I'm proud. And so it doesn't have, the only place it says Cultured Bumpkin is on the sleeve, like the Nike swoosh. People that are not even listeners would still be attracted to that if they have certain interests. So I have several sort of literature themed graphic pieces of clothing. So that's another way that sort of have monetized it. And then obviously the fact that, here's my voiceover website. If you are an audiobook producer or you have a business or, you need whatever, check my link and maybe we can work together. Thanks, bye, that kind of thing. So it's sort of like I get to post a commercial anytime I want. And then a podcast listen is so much more valuable than a TikTok listen. TikTok, they might be with you for 2 or 3 seconds. You might even get a reaction within that 2 or 3 seconds, but it's much more of a, scroll and let's be entertained with the next hit of dopamine. Whereas when people sit down to listen to your podcast, they're with you for, an hour. You know what I mean? And so their relationship with you is going to be so much different. And so on a podcast, when you say you should think about buying this, the rate of sort of conversion is a lot higher on that.
Yeah, I just I'm particularly, I guess, maybe interested in it today because this is going to be published in a few days, but today is April 23rd. So we just published our 5th episode, and I use Buzzsprout as the host. And Buzzsprout, you can monetize. There's 6 categories, right? And we're 5/6 of the way there. So we just uploaded our 5th episode. So you have to have 5. I forget what the bottom 3 boxes are, but there's 6 criteria you have to meet. And today we just checked another one off the list. And you have to have minimum of 5 episodes. So we checked that off the list. And the other box we checked off today is that the average play time of the episodes have to be 23 minutes. And obviously these are long form interviews. So we checked that box off as well. Now, the biggest challenge is we have to get 1,000 downloads in 30 days, which is a tall task, and I'm not sure how lucrative that would be, but it's certainly a goal along the way and pretty cool that you can see that progress is being made. So yeah, appreciate you sharing that from your perspective. I think that helps me. I do want to leverage the podcast to get more coaching business as well as provide obviously free advice and wisdom to those listening. I know we're running a little bit over. I have a few more questions I'd love to get through. Do you have some extra time?
Yeah.
Right. All right. So speaking of the monetization, right? You've built an audience. At what point, and however this makes sense to you, maybe it's number of followers, maybe it's like a certain point in time, maybe it's the number of episodes or videos you've published, whatever platform. But at what point in time were you like, I have a following that I can leverage for my benefit?
Well, I think if you have any followers, if you have one follower on any platform, you could potentially leverage that into a sale. And it depends on what you're selling. You know what I mean? I don't know at what point. I would say in something like Instagram, which was sort of personal for a long time, just put, we're at getting ice cream, that kind of thing. I think I started using it more like a business probably within the last year. Same with YouTube. And I suppose in the last year and a half with the podcast, as opposed to just, I'm just going to post stuff and just see if anybody watches it. So within the last year, I've said, okay, I'm going to start using this like a business. I'm going to have concerted effort. I'm going to write out some plans, like come up with a plan where I'm just going to throw crap at a wall and see what sticks. We're going to say, all right, here's some uploaded type of plans. How can I repurpose content? Where can I take a piece of content and post it as a YouTube short, as a TikTok, as an Instagram reel kind of a thing? Looking for ways to do that. So yeah, I guess in the last year and a half on all my platforms. And then very recently, I talked to a guy named Sean Cannell. He's got a thing called Think Media. It's a media sort of growth YouTube channel. And he said, you ought to, like on all your content, make sure they know you're a voice actor and they can work with you. So that way they're not only being entertained, but they're like, oh, I could work with this guy. That was just a few months ago. And so I've really been trying to, think about it like that as well.
For those of you listening, if you haven't picked up on it, Jake Phillips is a voice actor and you can work with him. So you can find him just about anywhere at Jake Phillips.
That's right. Well, I have the Cultured Bumpkin, and then I have my voiceover site is jakephillips.us.
Excellent.
So
nice plug there. We talked about unintended consequences earlier. It could be a good or bad unintended consequence that you weren't thinking about of your new career.
I guess any creative type, and I'm kind of a creative type, I am not very organized naturally. I have to put a lot of effort to be as organized as, let's say, someone that's a little easier for them. So when you're your own boss and you make your own schedule, you better have a little structure when it comes to organization, or you can literally piss away some time and waste time so much if you don't have some structure, especially if you're like me and you're sort of prone to procrastination, time wasting. I would say it maximizes your flaws, right? It's like getting in a ring with Mike Tyson. You're going to figure out how good a boxer you are real quick when you're up against that. So when you're treading water, trying to put food on the table and pay the mortgage sort of a deal, like you mentioned, you're going to figure out your weaknesses real fast if you already didn't. And so I'd say that the identification of a weakness would be, I guess, a good thing. Because if I have a weak point in my defense, I want to know where it is so I can work on that. But then also, it is a weak point. And so I didn't know that was coming. That's an unintended consequence. I got to do something fast. And yeah, I think working for yourself is sort of just exhilarating and terrifying and extremely fulfilling. And yeah, it's one of those things you might not know completely. It's like the military can train you for combat and get you as close as you can to a combat situation with artillery simulators, strobe lights, even actors that have like one limb and they've put fake blood on it and they're laying out on the road screaming. They do a real good job sometime, but it still is not 100% get you ready. It may be 95, but not 100.
Yeah.
And that's the same way until you're by out making it work. I don't know that you can cover all your bases. You just got to do it.
Yeah, I agree. You just got to jump into it, right? You can prepare for it as much as you can. And we talked about before of continuing to do your day job while you focused more of your like free time into voice acting. But at some point, you just have to say, I know as much as I'm going to know now, managing my schedule the way I'm managing my schedule. And if I want to pursue this for the benefits that I anticipate, then it's time to like do the thing, right? Yeah. So thank you for sharing. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think I saw somewhere that your love of classic literature and poetry, I believe, or one or both came from your father used to read to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
How much of your story today do you attribute to him reading to you as a child?
I mean, for a long time, I don't know. It was my dad, who's no longer with us. He passed away in 2013. He was an amazing man. I think he passed away when I was 29, and he was exactly the same in private as he was in public. Everybody that thought they knew him, they knew him. That was the real guy. Integrity, a man of integrity. If the door was shut, just like it was out in the open. No difference in how he acted. And, anyway, a great man. So it's hard to say. He obviously had a huge influence on my life. I don't know how much of that comes from reading, but also I think the fact that he was a strength and conditioning coach. So he was a strong man, but his sort of value of the aesthetic and wanting to pass that along to me, and never, I can remember him saying, don't be too cool to appreciate a sunset. You know what I mean? Don't be too cool to appreciate beauty. If you get to where you have a hard time admitting to your friends that something is beautiful, and not like, oh, that woman, not like that, but like that tree is gorgeous. Do you hear that bird? My gosh. If you ever have a hard time admitting that to your friends, you need to get some new friends. And one of the reasons why is he was that guy he was warning me about as coming up. He thought that was stupid and that kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway, I'm glad that he instilled a love of beauty within me. And I think that it has to have had a difference in some way.
Yeah, I love that. That is beautiful. It's a beautiful story. Before we wrap up here, last question. What would be the best advice you would give to your younger self today?
I'm extraordinarily blessed that I don't have any regrets. I was awkward around that girl. I shouldn't have said whatever. Maybe some little things like that. But as far as life advice, I was very fortunate to have a strong father figure and a mother as well. And in my life, not everybody's got that. I did, and I'm thankful for it. And basically listen to older people that care about you, because they're not trying to lead you astray. They want what's best for you. So maybe they're not as technologically advanced as you are, but that doesn't mean they're an idiot. They're probably a lot wiser than you are in a lot of ways. And if you can kind of respect the people that are older than you and love you, which hopefully you would have in your life, and then temper that with whatever you're trying to do. But respect your elders, I guess. That's pretty old school advice, but man, that is some good stuff. Because I've seen some guys my age that sort of just, what do they know? And just, I don't know, went down kind of a bad path or made it hard on themselves than if they would have listened to their dad or their grandpa or whatever mentor they had, teacher, So yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the most influential book I've ever read is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I mean, it was written, I don't know, in the 30s, 40s, something like that, a long time ago, maybe even before that. But it's still a bestseller till this day. And the principles in there are still principles today, right? You can still implement them into your modern life in 2024. The examples will change, right? There's a story in there about how Abraham Lincoln would write scathing letters because the generals of the Union early on in the Civil War, they would win a battle, but they wouldn't pursue the Confederates. And he would get so infuriated by the lack of field awareness, I suppose, that he would write these scathing letters to the generals about how angry he was, about how he would make different decisions. But then he would write these letters and then put them in his desk drawer and never send them. And then the next morning he would wake up and he would write a much more tempered, much more tactful letter that he would send to the general explaining his position and what he wished they would have done, but in a manner in which would net him better results, right? If you just sent the scathing letter, the general's going to be pissed and probably do the same thing. But if you compliment sandwich that letter, or if you temper it, or if you're more tactful, then you're probably going to get the better results that you're looking for. And like today, we don't send letters anymore like that, but we send emails all the time. So the principle still stays the same, right? You get the email that pisses you off, instead of writing an email back that's going to piss somebody else off, maybe you write it, but like leave it in drafts, right? Maybe be a little bit careful too, and don't put their email address in there and hit send that accidentally. Type it, get off your chest, but then give yourself a moment to breathe, come back, and then write the email. So some advice is just ageless. So I think that's a valid point. Where can the listeners find you at, Jake?
You can find me on YouTube, TikTok, any podcast platform for the most part, The Cultured Bumpkin or theculturedbumpkin.com.
I love that. Jake, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time today. I know we went a little bit over, but I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will as well.
Good deal. Well, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And that's it for today's conversation here on the Randall Osché Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you've enjoyed listening as much as we've enjoyed recording it. Many, many thanks to our guests today for sharing their knowledge, their experience, and their life lessons. If you found today's conversation insightful, interesting, inspiring, please join our growing community by subscribing to the Randall Osché Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and never ever miss another episode. We'd love to hear your feedback, so keep the community alive by sharing your takeaways from today's episode and use the hashtag Randall Osché Podcast. Your feedback and interaction fuels our continued efforts to build a safe space for meaningful, long-form conversations. So thank you so much for the support. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the conversation going.